Hey there, Lake Grove Church. Pastor Mark McElraith here, and today is Wednesday, June 23rd, which means we are on page 145 of our Reservoir devotional reading as a church. So I hope you had a chance to look at that text. You know that the text for today focuses on John chapter 13. And I'm going to just look at a few of those verses, not all of them, but just a few of those verses from our devotion today. John 13:12 and following says, after he had washed their feet, after Jesus had washed their feet, he had put on his robe and had returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." And then skipping forward to verse 34, he says, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." What a nice verse. I'm sure many of you have heard that. It's a meaningful verse, and it sort of warms our heart when we hear that. However, how can love be something that is commanded of you? This is a really tough commandment if we're honest with ourselves. Isn't love a natural outpouring of, well, love? Isn't that just supposed to be something that comes? Can you make it happen? I mean, this is commanded by Jesus, so can we make love happen? That's a great question. Well, I think it's helpful for us to see how Jesus modeled his love. As a matter of fact, he says in verse 34, just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. So how has Jesus loved them? Well, we see in this particular case that he washes their feet. Jesus serves them. It certainly wasn't simply a feeling, it was an act, wasn't it? And even then, the next day, we think about how Jesus shows his love for his disciples. The very next day, Jesus displays an even more overwhelming act of love. If you know what happens the next day, Jesus dies for us on the cross. What an act of great love for us. Now, if we follow Jesus, this Jesus who shows such overwhelming, self-sacrificing love for us and for the world, then aren't we called to reflect that kind of love as well? Now, we're certainly not the Messiah. We're not called to die for the world. But if Jesus is the Lord that we follow, shouldn't our lives reflect that self-sacrificing love, that act of love of giving ourselves away? And we certainly are commanded to love, as Jesus says, as he has loved. Now, the difficult thing, of course, comes with, but what about the people that we really don't even like? Are we supposed to love them as well? Well, of course, Jesus says, yes, love them. When we think about that, people who have hurt us, people who have wronged us, we have to love them as well. And that's a big challenge for us, isn't it? Well, as we see what Jesus is saying here, though, he shows his love through these wonderful acts of love. Not necessarily a feeling that we can tell, right? I mean, certainly Jesus probably feels that way as well, but it's through that act that we see Jesus' love. And so as we think about this, we realize that our actions, once we start acting out of love, certainly, hopefully, those feelings will surely follow. So I thought I'd try a little exercise with you. Imagine someone close to you. Maybe it's a family member, but imagine somebody close to you. And now think about this. What would they say if you asked them how well you loved them? What would they say? Do you love them well? Now think about, what could you do to be better at showing that person that you love them? Okay, now I want to ask another question. Very similar, very similar. Imagine someone you really don't like so much. And I ask the same question of ourselves as well with that person that you don't really like so much. What would they say about how well you love them? And now ask yourself, what could you do to be better at showing them love? I have to be honest, that question makes me feel a little uncomfortable too. And yet, that's a self-sacrificial love, isn't it? And so if we were to model ourselves after Jesus, well, then I would say let's love. Let's love even if our heart is not totally in it. We can love with our actions. And then I believe our hearts will follow. So let's try to live our lives like that today. Let's love with our actions, knowing that our hearts will follow.